Hey, audience, thanks for joining us today, this Thursday, May 16th. My name is Eduardo. I am a marketing manager here at Modern Sales Pros, based in New York City. So, we are here today to talk about how to build champions that close enterprise deals. We have two of the brightest minds here today. Joey, can you introduce yourself to the audience?
Hi, everyone. My name is Joey Wright. I head up our sales team here at Doc. I'll go into Doc a little bit more in a minute. Background, started my career at Yelp about 10 years ago. Ran a cold calling team selling digital ads, spent about 2.5 years there. I know there's a lot of this community that started cutting their teeth in kind of that space. Moved over to LinkedIn, spent a number of years selling SaaS, specifically talent solutions. Shout out to any LinkedIn fam that's listening. And then last but not least, spent my last 5 years or so building a company called Modern Health, which is where I met Maryana, and she'll go ahead and introduce herself in a second. I'm really excited to spend the next hour with you. We grew from 11 employees to a couple hundred and became one of the world's best premier offerings for mental health to large SaaS employers. So a lot of that will come through today in terms of like how to work complex deals, working with multiple champions, how to multi-thread effectively, all of those things. And as of the last 6 months, I'm now spearheading the go-to-market function at Doc. I'm really excited for the next 55 minutes with you all. And maybe with that, I'll pass it over to Maryana.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Joey. So I'm Maryana Kessel. I'm the Director of Enterprise and Mid-Market Sales here at Modern Health. I started my career at Box as a sales development rep, once an SDR, always an SDR. And I'm so fortunate to the training and incredible people that I met so early on in my career really set me on an incredible trajectory. I spent about 3 years at Box, became an AE, and then I moved to Flexport, which is a digital freight forwarder. I was the sixth AE hire and spent about 5 years at Flexport in between different AE roles, as well as leading a team of sellers and CSMs on the East Coast. And then I also started a consulting company and then joined Modern Health about 2.5 years ago. So, as Joey mentioned, we are one of the premier solutions for mental well-being platforms for enterprise companies. And I lead a team of incredible account executives across the country. Really excited
Awesome.
to be here.
So I'm going to spend about 2 to 3 minutes just giving an overview of like who Doc is. I'll go through a nice agenda and then we'll get right into the discussion. That'll last about 30 minutes. And then from there, we will go ahead and finish up with some Q&A. And then at the very end, if you're interested, we'll do a quick like 30,000 foot overview of a Doc workspace. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, so just kind of to give an overview of the why now first. So again, Joey Wright, I lead up our sales team here at Doc. Kind of a personal story, actually. So over the last 5 years or so, I spent a lot of time selling very complex international deals that were hyper multi-threaded to some of the largest employers on the planet. And one of the biggest challenges that we face day in and day out is there's just a death by committee that happens across our selling functions at the moment. You have to build a champion. That champion has to go to their boss. That boss becomes a champion. We have to figure out what motivates them. They have to move up the funnel. We have to tie it back to OKRs. And in that process, there just becomes a plethora of information, not only for the AE, but for your internal stakeholders. And as we move through the funnel, we know more and more people get engaged. One of the biggest challenges that faces us as sellers today is the ability to get everything into a single location effectively, make it really easy for your end user to actually find what they need and signpost them to the value very quickly so that they can go sell on your behalf. But then a big blocker behind that too is the inability to actually see what they've done if you've done all of those things right. We're going to spend the next 30 minutes unpacking all of that, from like, what does a good champion look like? How do we empower them effectively in our selling process? And then ultimately like tying it back to Doc, how do we actually have the visibility and accountability within a deal process to understand how that is moving through the funnel? I'm really, really excited to hear Maryana's take on a few of those things. With that being said, we'll kind of put a pause on Doc for the moment, but essentially like headline is one single space for you and your champion, whether that's from first disco all the way to close one, that gives you an ability to set them up for success and really track progress over time. So if you're interested in learning more about deal rooms, a big differentiator for Doc as well is we support the entire client journey. So everything from net new to actually the handoff with implementation in a single space. At the 5 minute mark to the top of the hour, I'll go ahead and share a space. I'm just really excited to be with you all. So digging in a little bit more, As we kind of go through today's conversation, we'll do a nice little framing first. Selling through champions is a very broad topic. We'll do our best to stick to kind of like 3 main challenges on like a 10-minute interval. So we'll cover each one, go through them, have a nice back and forth conversation, and then from there we'll open it up to some Q&A. As you're kind of listening in, if there's anything that really sticks out in your day-to-day or a place that you're stuck in the process, feel free to shut it out and we'll be happy to kind of go into that in a little bit more detail too. And then we'll finish with a deal room and actually showing you what doc looks like. Cool. I'm going to set the scene a little bit. Selling through champions to close enterprise deals. This is a topic that I think all of us are extremely invested in making sure we get right. There's really 3 pieces of it when we were going through prep that we felt were most important. Before even going into the how, I think the who is the most important piece here. Specifically, what is a good champion? Is your champion your point of contact? Maybe. Why do they actually care about moving this forward? How are they motivated personally, but then also at a team and an organizational level? So we'll spend a little bit of time there. Can they pitch the solution back to you? So all topics that we'll go into a little bit more, and really how do you test and hold that person accountable? One thing to kind of shift the mindset before we go into discussion that I think is the most important is just an empathy building exercise. The facts are that the people that we're working with day in and day out are going beyond the scope of their own role to help you close one a deal. So knowing that the process is extremely complex and long and multi-threaded and has objections and road bumps for us is also the same that's happening with your champion as they move internally, especially if they're newer to the organization. So we'll frame the conversation on the second part of this discussion today around how do we empower those people and set them up for success while also giving our managers and our sellers what they need to really drive accountability and move the deal forward in the process too. Which will bring us to our last topic, is like what's actually happening. If we have identified the champion correctly, if they're really excited about whatever your product is and the solution that it solves for, they feel empowered rather than fatigued in that process. How do we actually know that they're doing what they're saying they're doing as they sell to power internally? And we'll spend a little bit of time there talking about tooling and accountability and some best practices that Maryana and I have seen over the years as well. I guess before moving forward, I'd love to open it up to you, Maryana, like anything that I missed or you think is important to call out.
Yeah, I would just say that this is one of the most important topics in enterprise SaaS, probably only second to discovery, which is a big part of champion building as well. So I'm really excited about this topic.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up discovery too, because I think that's one thing as we go through each of these pillars that you'll see is just a constant. The moment you stop discovering, I know it's probably at this point so templatized and so just like everywhere on LinkedIn is truly the moment that you lose the deal. So we'll talk about some late stage discovery and how you can actually test your champion to figure out if they know their stuff as they move forward and help them on that journey to get to closed one. I'm going to leave you before we hop into discussion and I start kind of moderator brain with a little bit of anxiety, and it is very intentional, but this is our process today. Just like as a caveat, this is very simplified. If we're talking about Modern Health as an example, I spent my last 5 years there. We had global deals that had 30, 40, 50 stakeholders in them across parent companies, subsidiaries, multiple champions that need information, proposals, case studies, RFPs in different languages, different requirements from a security perspective, a legal perspective. But the state of the union or the headline here is that selling is really hard in our current environment. So how do we make it easy for our AEs to identify where they need to go? How do we simplify this process, low-key pitch for Doc here, to actually move people through the funnel in a way that gets them the information they need quickly to go do that work for you? And then from there as well, how do we make it easy for you to actually understand where they're going? I'm curious to open it up to you, Maryana. Like, does this resonate? Obviously, I can't ask that.
Yes, I mean, this is very real, and one thing that I think has made this an additional challenge is that the teams that we're working with are typically remote as well, or distributed across, potentially the US or even internationally. And that's something that we experience a lot at Modern Health is international teams. And so making sure that everyone sees the correct version, that they have what they need to make the right decision, it's a real challenge.
Maybe that's a good place to kind of get into it. I mean, if you look at this chart, you'll see that just on the internal side, there could be anywhere between 2 and 10 people supporting a deal. We then have the champions, as I should say, that work within the context of the deal on the buying side. For those of you out there, I'm guessing that there's probably an aspect of working with consultants or third parties sometimes as well. So I'm curious maybe to open it up, and I'll stop sharing my screen. I think the first pillar that we want to discuss is like, what is a champion? And maybe I'll turn it over to you first, Maryana, and that's a good place to start on kind of the first topic.
Yeah, so I know we have a poll that just got launched. So if you are live, please go ahead and take a look at that. But to answer your question, Joey, the traditional answer of what is a champion, and I will just kind of pitch John McMahon's book, The Qualified Sales Leader. It is what I would consider the SaaS sales Bible at this point. You can get it on Amazon. I have a copy literally on my desk here. A champion is someone who has influence and authority. Ideally, they have both. You can have coaches, you can have different types of people in the decision-making process that have either authority or influence, but a champion is going to ideally have both.
What is the difference between influence and authority in your eyes?
Authority is the easy one. Authority is typically a hierarchical like title. What budget do you own? What decisions can you actually make? What deal size can you sign off on? Obviously, the higher up you go in terms of enterprise and strategic selling, the more rigid that is. But influence is really, I think, the more interesting one, because influence could be anybody in the organization. And typically what you find is that a decision maker, which today is typically the CFO / the CEO, they will have a number of people that may report directly to them or not, but as influencers and what we would call like trusted confidants for that individual finally making the decision of a go no go. And so I think someone who has influence is someone who has seen buying processes before, can make prioritization decisions, has context of what actually this product will solve on the ground floor, and can really tie that to business outcomes at the highest levels, at the KPI level. So yeah, influence I think is the more interesting one, because it's a little bit harder to figure out when you're live with a client.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up influence, and I want to like not table it, but carry it forward into the second topic, which will be more around like buyer enablement and how to set that influencer, I guess, to use as a better way, up for success as we move down the funnel.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, to peel it a step back, and I'm happy to answer the question to start since you kind of answered the first one. But if we identify the person that has influence in the organization, let's say in this instance it came from an inbound. Let's keep it really simple. They inbound, they reach out to your company. Yes, I'm really interested in the product that you have to offer and the solution. Should we talk about like the pain funnel a little bit? Because maybe that is interesting.
Yeah, I think that's helpful context.
Cool. So I'll give some context. So over the last 5 years, Maryana and I worked at the same organization. Oftentimes that persona was someone in HR. There was some sort of OKR around bringing mental health as, the fourth pillar of well-being into their environment, whether that was, an effect of the pandemic or someone that was really excited about championing that cause internally. Just as a side note, I thought this was a really fun way to sharpen sales skills, because there's a lot less ROI driven conversations happening and a lot more figuring out like, what is the intrinsic motivation for you to move forward with this as an organization? So maybe scaling it back from there, the way that we would always think about identifying that influencer is, if the person gets on, like, what are the 3 levels of pain? And I think like at this kind of forum, with everybody in the room being in some sort of leadership position or influencing revenue in their organization, they've probably heard over and over again about the personal pain. And I think it's a topic probably worth discussing for a few minutes, because although it's something that I think as leaders, we all understand, and we've probably been in our own situations with deal selling, it is something that reps often miss. And I'm curious maybe to throw it back to you, Maryana, when you think about the personal pain at either Flexport or at Modern, how do you find it?
Yeah, it's like question that's as old as time. How do you find it? Well, I think that, it does start with discovery of, why are we having the conversation today? Everyone is so busy. They're choosing to spend time with you. There must be a reason behind that. So really understanding, what started the reason for the conversation. And then I think going a bit deeper and really understanding, And I think modern health is maybe maybe slightly easier in that mental health is a personal thing that everyone experiences, right? It's like physical health. You have it. It's either good or bad or it changes, but everyone has some sort of personal experience with it where you can really start to understand, how is the organization thinking about it and start high level. Okay, how does that impact your teams? And how does that impact you personally? I think with when I was at Flexport, it's maybe a little bit harder in that it's supply chain software. And why does that personally impact you and your team? There's a lot of challenges when it comes to lack of visibility and, there's constant exceptions happening and constant changes. And what does that do downstream? So what you want to do with these different levels of pain is be able to tie them to what are the company objectives, right? I would say OKRs, KPIs, like those are the things that actually get a deal done. The team perspective, because you do need more voices in the room. I would say I'm sure there's some stat of like 6+ people involved. Like there has to be more than just one soldier complaining about something to get a deal done. And then that personal piece is so important. You have to have someone who feels so strongly that this is a top priority, whether it's something that impacts them day to day or they just believe it's the right thing to do. Or
Mhm.
in a lot of cases, like a lot of the champions that I worked with as an AE, they actually got promoted for bringing in Flexport. So I think it's being able to connect what is your goal behind this? Like, what's your why? What's the fire? What's going to keep you pushing on the champion side to really be able to bring a deal forward?
Yeah, I love that. I think, like, simply put, too, just to kind of distill some of the language and the learnings that you mentioned in a few different scenarios. It's like, how are you being measured on this, and why do you care about it during the next quarter or the next half of the year once you've identified some sort of timeline, which is an
Yeah.
extremely important piece to call out too. Just to tell a quick story, year two at Modern Health, we had a champion at a consulting firm that we were working with, and she was extremely motivated by bringing mental health into the organization. And we ran into every objection in the book. This was like a 1.5-year deal. 3 of our decision makers quit. We had new leadership come in. They then switched consulting firms, which we had to work with very often. We had to go back up to RFP. And over and over again, this individual was like, this is what I'm being measured on over the next 1.5 years, is finding a solution that makes our employees' well-being happier. And I know, kind of to give the out, as Maryana mentioned, when you can tie it back to like the touchy feelies, it may seem a lot easier. But this person was literally willing to put their job on the line to get something done. And I think that's a lesson that we can all kind of take with us as we move through kind of whatever our product is. Like, cool, you sell sales software, or you sell logistics software, last mile logistics software, or fintech. Like, when you think about the person that you're spending hours a week with, how does this actually matter to them, and how is it going to make their life easier or make them look good in front of their boss, which is an extremely important point.
Yeah.
I'm sure we all have examples there. I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, I think that's spot on. And actually, I appreciate the question in the chat from Jim. Given a complex sales transaction that have multiple personas on the buy side, is there an optimal order or stage of when the champion becomes involved? Joe, if you want to take that.
Ooh, interesting. No, I don't think so. I think it's really, and maybe this is a good point to transition, Jim, into like the second topic, is like the champion and the buyer enable tactics. I'm looking at my little timer and we have about 2 minutes left in this section. But I think, like, going back to Mariana's intro when we were throwing up the slides, it's really about understanding fundamentally what the authority or the influence looks like, right? Like, if you have a champion that comes into the funnel and you're testing them on discovery and they really only know an outline or structure of the organization and they're a bit newer, or they've been there a little bit longer, but they don't know, the water cooler gossip or the politics internally, you might want to use that person a little bit different versus in the example that I gave, that person was a VP of well-being at that organization who had been there for 5+ years, knew all of her peers, where they were, when they were online, what the best time was to get with them. And then from there, it became more of a strategic conversation. So I would say, like, unfortunately, it's like a yes and or a no and situation where you really want to lean into what you can figure out and then work to strategize. I think, like, just to add on to that point, and then I'll pause. One thing that reps do wrong is they try to make the sales process too formulaic. We go disco, then demo, then proposal, then a debrief, then executive summary. If your champion doesn't know what they're doing, maybe you lead them to water and recommend, versus if you have someone that's been at the organization for 5+ years, maybe it's worth taking a step back and asking, in the past, when you've brought this on, what has worked and how can we build on that together? Once you've gotten to the most important point, which is, do you want to fight for this? One thing I'll add, and then I'm curious to open it up to Maryana, and then I'm going to transition topics, is I think that our sellers don't do a good enough job of getting to a human level with our buyers and just asking them that question. Like, hey, we're going to be spending a lot of time together, and I pretty much understand why you're excited about this. As we move through the funnel, like, is this something that you want to fight for? Because if so, like, we'll give you every resource in the book. We'll support you. We'll hop on the phone as much as you want to make sure that you're set up for success, which adds the human element into it that I think a lot of sellers miss. And I don't know if
I couldn't agree more. And I really think that it's important to think about, one, I think that this matters depending on the types of deals you're working, both ARR amount, right? Under say 100K, that's a different process than a 7-figure deal, right? So there's going to be ranges within this, and also the experience of that champion. So if we take an example of, say, a smaller organization, maybe the contract size is 25K. They still need to provide a business case in today's environment. Like, no CFO is going to just sign off on that. So in that scenario, maybe someone's less experienced, but they have influence and they do have authority. What you would want to do with them is you want to basically coach them and say, hey, look, trust me, I've done this a lot. These are the things that work. Here's what we're going to want to do. We're going to want to show what is the business problem. How are we going to solve it? Why does it matter to do it? And what is the cost and the ROI behind that, right? In a very formulaic way. And you basically want to make it as easy as possible for them to do that. And I'm talking like a written out deck or a written out email. And hey, all you need to do, champion, is hit send, and now you look like a genius. And so that's probably with someone who's maybe less experienced, that you're really holding their hand and making it super simple for them. In a case where someone has more experience or it's a higher ticket item, you ideally want to make that really collaborative and say, look, this is 90% complete. What we're doing here is we're outlining the same thing, right? What is the issue? How do we solve it? Why does it matter? All of these kinds of things. And then you're asking them the questions of, how does, Sally, the CFO, think about these things? Mm-hmm. When in the past have you seen this actually fall apart at the final stages? What concerns you when going to present to her and the committee, right? Those are the types of questions that an experienced person who's sold internally before will know, and you can really tailor that presentation to what they know will work. And so I think we had a question, we were just chatting about, like, when do you trust your champion? The answer is never. But you want to really understand, like, what is your experience with this, and how do we together look at blind spots and make sure that when that it's a big deal to present something forward, and you're putting your reputation on the line in those cases as a champion, and you want to make sure that goes smoothly for them and makes them look good. How do we work together with that champion and find any of those blind spots so that we give ourselves the best chance at success?
I want to touch on that a little bit. We've just gotten into the second topic in an extremely natural way, which is super nice, which is really like champion fatigue, setting them up for success, and then really pulling that first piece opening statement of influence versus authority through. And I think Maryana touched on a few good points. The first one being is, like, what are top reps doing differently? Like, if you look at your organization and you look at your B players versus your A players, what are the one or the two or the three little things that your A players are doing every single time that your B players aren't doing? And I think if you take a look at what Maryana just stated, there's a few key themes in there. The first thing is, like, distilling down and making it as simple as possible for them to pitch it back and align it to the value of the business. And I know that seems very simple, but you'll see the best reps go in and spend hours on prep, on just the three little challenges that they're solving for in the org, how they're tying it back to the why now, what that means for the personal pain, the team pain of the the team that person's on, and then what that means to the org, understanding that every notch along the way in that decision-making tree, they're not going to be making the same pitch, and then running it back with that champion. One point that I'd love to call out too is, as you're going through that process, there's this distrust but trust but verify thing going on, where you're taking that influence and that, ladder of authority, and you're challenging it every step of the way. So as we move through the funnel, Mrs. Champion, Mr. Champion, talk to me. How are you feeling about this? Who are you talking to next? What do you think? I was coined at Modern Health for a term, and now I'm sure my doc peers that are on the call know it as well, which is rip it apart. So it's like leading with the best practice, doing all of the work for them and showing up with it ready. Hey, you mentioned these are the things that are important. I went ahead and put it together for you. Let's now spend the time before you present it back to CFO with you ripping it apart and putting it in your own language and giving them that agency to build and collaborate with you, especially when we're talking about really large enterprise deals. Because the fact is that 80% of the time, you're probably not going to be in the room. So having the ability to get in the trench with someone, build trust, build a lot of loyalty, knowing that you're also in a competitive environment where your peers probably not doing that. And they're going to remember, hey, Maryana spent 2 extra hours with me on a Friday, making sure that I felt really good. And then the morning of sent me a coffee saying, you got this, go get it, right? Like those little things go such a long way. And it's stuff that a lot of people selling miss. They're like, I gave the pricing, I gave the incentives, they have the business case, they have 75 product slides that show exactly what we do. Wrong. Keep it simple for them. Give them the ability to rip it apart and put it in their own language. And then the last point, and then we should kind of move to, once you've identified a champion, you've moved through the process and prepared them and made them feel good and taken all of the work out of it. What does it look to, verify and validate that they did the work? From there is making sure in all instances that they just really have a really good grasp on how to pitch it back. A top rep at Modern Health, very early days, who is also one of the most winningest reps at LinkedIn, President's Club 4 or 5 times, would always say, before they go to CFO, did you ask them to pitch it back to you? And I think that's the most important piece. We talk a lot as salespeople, and if they can't reframe it in their own language and feel really good about how they bring it forward in the simplest way, knowing that they're going to get probably 60 seconds in a board meeting or a one-on-one to make their pitch, then you lost the deal. I don't know, Maryana, if you have anything to add there. I'm sure you do.
Yeah, I think the big takeaways, there's really 2. The first is information leverage. Like if you're not getting the information, someone else is. So I think it's really important that when you have identified your champion and you're building that relationship with them, you're on a texting basis. You are figuring out what else are they working on? What's really getting into their shoes, and being able to understand, hey, with all these things going on, how am I going to help this person? And I would say, I haven't been at Flexport and I think 4 years, and there's still champions that I have from when I was an AE that I'm Facebook friends with and that we're on WhatsApp with. And it's been 4 years since I even left that organization, and we're still engaged. And so I think that's the level, especially when you get to the 7-figure deal size, that you really need to get to. It's less of the kids and the dogs and all that kind of cheesy stuff. It's so much more about who are they as individuals, and what are their personal goals, what are their professional goals, and being able to align with that person.
And I think most importantly, and you'll agree with this, we've worked on deals for countless hours together over the past half decade. It's do they feel like they won? Selling is so much about the emotional part of it. Even if you're selling a technical product, are you making that person look good in front of the individual they're going to be speaking to? And I saw someone in the chat mention energy. That's the most important piece too. It's all the little intangibles where if you look at your best rep in your organization, that person stands up straight, they have a smile every single day, they bring energy to the call, they make every person feel in the room feel loved, and they're buying that brand when they sign on as a customer too, with the hopes that they'll get that experience as well. And I know that's a cheesy, funny, warm thing, but it is so true and so important. We got a note this morning at Doc from one of our late stage deals that said, wow, this has been an incredible experience. We just sent them a Sendoso. So shout out to Sendoso. Thank you so much. This made me feel good as I'm going for a final pitch this morning. Thanks, Andy.
Wow, I love that.
That's just as important, because it's all the little things, which is just extremely valuable. I know we have 1.5 to 2 minutes left before we move into questions. And I wanted to close with tying it back. And I'll give Maryana the final word here, and then we'll hop into Q&A. So first piece is, how do you identify a champion? Are they willing to fight? Do you have their intrinsic motivation to go to bat for you? And again, when we say champion, it's probably plural, right? Like, how are you building consensus and community throughout the process? The second piece is, how tactically do you keep them engaged? And hopefully you've been able to take a few things away from that. We set them up with the right pitch. We give them what they need to move about internally, knowing that probably only about 10 to 13% of the time we actually work with them. And the other 90%, they're doing the selling on their own internally. I want to spend 2 minutes here and then let's go to Q&A. How do you validate it? You do all the things. You build the pitch deck, you build the mutual action plan, you build the business case, you align incentives to timeline, you do all of those pieces. I'm curious, when you think about your best reps today, like, what are they doing to not only set their champion up for success, but hold them accountable to like those major steps to get to closed won?
Yeah, I think so. There's a really good phrase, I believe it's by Paul Graham, which is only the paranoid survive. It's a Y Combinator thing, which I think is actually pretty true. So you have to be paranoid. You have to know the details of when is the meeting, who's going to be there, what are their personalities like, what's going to resonate. And of course, again, this gets more complex. The bigger the deal is or the larger the organization. But once you understand those major milestones, you have to keep track of them, and you have to make sure that that champion, plurals, has what they need to be able to succeed. So getting ahead of things like legal and security and data privacy. And again, it's helpful when they know how things work at the organization to say, where have things dropped off before? Is there a concern around, having different certifications or whatever else it might be? Making sure that you're asking these questions, even if they don't know, they'll start thinking about that when they're in those presentations. The most basic, easiest lift is a mutual action plan. So you'll have items that are listed out, could be very, very simple, but here's the item, here's the date, who is the owner, and an update. And I would suggest some sort of frequency of a touch point and having that scheduled and calendared so that, even if they have to move it, they're thinking about it and you're able to hold them accountable to that.
And I think to add on to that point, and we'll monitor the chat for questions. Everybody's coming to the call. Like, that's the most important piece too. Like, if your stakeholders are not coming to the call and you're building out a project plan, you lose. Like, that's the piece of it too. There's accountability and it has to be mutual as you go through negotiations, give gets, next steps, timeline, introducing a client success manager early to win the deal, whatever the case is that you're doing, having that, we used to call it the drag and drop. So once you get to verbal, having that 30-minute sync on the calendar, preferably earlier in the week. Hey, let's meet at this time. The reason being is I want to make sure that I'm able to show up for you when you're doing a million other things. Again, tying it back to like the fatigue and empathy on their end. That way you have my time proactively. We'll be using this doc to go ahead and work back from this go live date. Let's go through it together. I know you mentioned legal process. I know you mentioned security process. What else? What else? What else? What else? What else? And getting it on paper. And as Maryana mentioned, really assigning owners, because going back to kind of the opening statement, they are going beyond the scope of their role, most likely, unless their job is vendor procurement, to get this done for you. So I love that call out, and anything to build or add on that.
No, that's exactly right. And should we move to Q&A?
Yeah, let's do it.
Jeff has a question here of, have you already discussed on how to find and identify champions in enterprise deals? I think we did touch on that, but I think it's important to just talk about it. The thing about finding and identifying champions in enterprise deals, and enterprise means different things at different organizations, but let's just call it a 6-figure deal, 1,000-person plus company. You might have obvious ones, right? Let's say you're selling a technical solution. Let's say you're selling an AI solution. Probably the CIO and the information organization is going to be the one that you're going to zoom into. And you might start with like VP of innovation or different titles that can, share you or kind of inspire you to think, okay, this person is going to care about improving the organization. You're going to look for titles like operational excellence or different things on LinkedIn where you can start to reach out.
Yep. I think,
yeah.
Oh yeah, you go. No, you go ahead.
Just one last thing on this is that you want to keep an open mind as to who has a personal reason to do this. Look at their LinkedIn profiles. Are they new to the organization? Maybe they want to make a splash, right? Or maybe they've been at the organization a long time. And this is someone that, is posting on LinkedIn about AI, and then you can say, hey, I'm working with so and so, but I wanted to reach out to you given this last post and make that connection. So the best way to identify them is by research, and then being able to think about, how to enable them and how to cultivate champions is connecting their personal interests with the business outcomes.
I wanted to add to that too, like whether, let's say you're prospecting or you have an SDR that an inbound or whatever, however the lead gets to you. One of the things that I really hate about sales is that we try too hard to speak sales language. When we talk to our clients, just like talk like a human. And I know it sounds simple, but like on the first call, if I'm talking to Maryana and she's telling me about the business pain and the reason she came into the conversation and all of the other stuff, so I'm like, okay, cool. Like, has some ties to the organization, seems like she might be like reading from some sort of thing that she wants to like get through. She's assessing me as a vendor. Like, I like to break the ice and just be like, can I ask you a question? And she's like, yeah, sure. I'm like, I'm curious, like, why do you care about this? Like, what kind of resonates with you? Or like, when you think about your manager and you go back and you have this conversation, like, what are you going to highlight? And like, what do you think they're going to care the most about? Like, the best reps just like get to the question, they get to the meat, and they don't do the whole, like, let's go through the BAMP structure and go down the list. And they just have a conversation, which I think is probably a primary reason that Maryana's been so successful in her career. But it's so important to call out. There's one question I really liked in the chat, and I want to cover it because it's one that's really tricky, which is, it comes from Marianne Bennett. Any recommendations on how to navigate champions for buyers that have a tougher personality when it comes to buying? Where do we start?
I love this question. So champions or buyers that have a tougher personality. Well, if they're a champion, that means that they have a personal interest in getting this over the line, right? They have that ideally authority, but definitely influence. And so I think if you're considering them a champion, then it's because they care. I think this one is so interesting because when they have a tough personality and maybe they're not connecting with you as much, you really want to tie it to, how do I make your life easier? What can I do to simplify this process for you? And, I remember a deal that I had. It was a 7-figure deal. And I could not crack this person. I was like, I know that they want this. I know that it's going to help them get promoted, but we were just not connecting. And I just said, hey, look, I was like really direct about it. I was like, look,
yeah, I know
I'm
you're
super busy. I know that this is not your favorite process. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do X, Y, Z. Which one of these things is the most important for you? If I do nothing else, what matters? And he just told me, he's like, listen, I don't mean to be like a jerk about this. It's just, I have a lot of pressures about A, B, C. And once I learned that, and once I cracked that, I was like, okay, he's not just mean. I need to distress in this. I need to get ahead of, it was a security issue that he was really worried about. I'll get ahead of that for you. I'll handle that for you. And that really did change the narrative of that deal. And we were able to get it done. But it's, I would say, like, kind of hitting it directly and remembering that people are people, and everyone's got a lot of things going on that you just might not know about. So if you can find a way to make their lives easier, I think that really does help.
One thing too to add is just like a Sandler tactic. Like, sometimes it's okay to mirror, right? Like, if someone's coming in really, really, really strong and they're like, this is my process and I need this sheet filled out and these are the things, like, cool. Okay, cool. Tell me more. Like, it sounds like you have this kind of figured out in terms of this is most important. Like, what's the order of operations here so we can set you up for success? Give, get, right? Like, now we can give them a little something. And then once we do that, we can get in return. Okay, perfect. I'll go ahead and get this done for you. That sounds great. Before I do that though, I'm curious to learn a little bit more about why this is important to you. And the reason I ask all those little devices to tie it back is I want to make sure that I'm setting you up for success. If you're telling someone that you want to set them up for success and they're still being horrible to you, most likely they're probably not going to be a great champion in your process. And it's bringing it back to that human element. And usually people tend to open up over time. We had a deal at Modern Health that was my biggest deal that I ever closed, and the woman never opened up to me. I talked to her like once a month and I thought that she hated me. And then after we closed the deal, she sent me a bottle of wine and was like, thank you for just like working with my process. You made my life easy. Sorry, I just have so much going on. I manage $20 million in business. So there's never a right answer. I think we have time for probably one more. Any in the chat that speak to you, Maryana?
I'm curious about this one here on from Courage of you have touched on identification of champions. How then do we handle a threat within the buying enterprise? And wow, what a great question, but also what a far-reaching question. Like threats could be, I mean, do you have a detractor, someone who is like actively against you? Really fun topic. Do you have maybe a threat is the economic situation? Maybe that organization is, they just had a really bad quarter. That's a threat too. So I think we can take this in a few ways. Joey, do you wanna start off and I can wrap up?
Yeah, for sure. A thread of mine that is fun. It's actually, I told the story in my interview when I interviewed with our CEO, Alex. He's like, what's the time that a deal fell apart? It was the last week of December, and it was my first year as an AE at Modern Health. And I had an extremely large logo in my pipeline that we got a verbal on. We had gone through legal and security review. We had an extremely strong champion. And the day before New Year's Eve, I got an email letting us know that they weren't moving forward because the president of their organization was on the board of our competitor. So a threat can also be a personal threat that comes from not doing your research and not understanding. And that was a really hard bullet to bite because it meant I missed my annual number. And then I had to like reforecast that back to our CEO at the time. So I think like just to kind of tie it back to internal versus external, threats can be things that happen when you also don't do your own prep. So in terms of the next segment, what we'll do is just like a wrap up and close. So I'm curious, Maryana, like as we go through, maybe just giving you the final word, what was your like favorite part of the session and what do you think is kind of the headline of today's conversation?
Yeah, I really appreciated the conversation, Joey. I know you and I can go for hours about these things. And I think the headline is, you have to look for both influence and authority and really understand that person on a human level. Why are they going to prioritize this over everything else? And then enabling them to present as best as they possibly can. That's getting to know the politics of the organization. That's getting to know who is on our side, who might not be on our side, getting ahead of different events that might occur, right? Any type of security questions or legal questions or things like that. And then making sure that you keep them accountable, right? Whether that's through a mutual action plan or a weekly follow-up meeting, setting them up for success and helping them prioritize what needs to get done. What would you say?
I love it. I think the big piece for me, and maybe I'll tie it home to kind of like the why now, is I just spent the last 5 years selling very global, multi-threaded, complex deals. One is a huge dating conglomerate that owns every app on the planet except for Bumble. We had 19 different organizations across 35 stakeholders in that deal, and things get complex very, very quickly. So identifying who cares, going back to like, how do you identify a champion? That's a deal that came to mind for me, is probably the best part because you get to like build that personal connection with them, but also test them along the way to see if they still care. And then the part that becomes the most difficult in our selling process, I think, is just setting them up for success. If we think about our organizations as a whole, there's so many different internal stakeholders that are trying to help you influence revenue. Whether it's a product marketing person or someone on the partnerships team or a marketing person or a sales enablement person or a sales manager or whoever that might be, and setting reps up for success in a way that makes it scalable and repeatable, but also gives them the autonomy to just interact with their buyer in a single space that feels lightweight in the midst of all of the other things they're doing on the other side during their day job is just as important too. So I think like in closing, what I'm going to do is just do like a quick 5-minute pitch of Doc for those of you that are interested. And then I'll go ahead and give it back to Eduardo. I just wanted to say before doing that, a big thank you to Maryana for her time today. I know stepping out of, a director role, managing 6+ teams in 2 segments is no small feat. So just wanted to acknowledge the time taken and the prep and all of it.
It was a pleasure.
And because I'm a kind of a warm and fuzzy guy, in the past 2 years, I've learned a lot from you in terms of just like how to challenge and identify champions too. We make a good pair. So just a big thanks.
Right back at you.
All right. So with that, I'll close us out with a quick little pitch. This is Doc. If you think about the process that you have today at most of your organizations, information probably lives everywhere. You have a G Drive, you have old docs, you have new reps hitting up top reps asking where those things are that help them close a deal. You're using multiple different platforms, whether it be email opens or outreach or Slack connects or mutual action plans through G Sheets. to try to identify and drive your champion forward. DocWorld is a little bit different. We've created a single entry point where you can interact with your buyer or prospect at each stage of the funnel. So on the net new side, post disco, and I'll show you an example here in a second, coming into a space, uploading all of the next steps, as well as the content that they need to bring that forward to get you to demo, all the way through legal, security, and closed won. Once you've gotten that closed won and you've celebrated it internally, having that institutional knowledge of a single space living within your CRM to set your CSM up for success. And then from there, once they're through implementation, running QBRs and renewals through Doc as well. How we do this is we've created a beautiful infrastructure that sits under our platform where all of your content lives. So your case studies, your pitch decks, your proposals, anything that your seller needs to sell and grab from a single location. And then from there, once you've shared that space directly with Maryana as my champion, I now have all of the little ways in the background to spy on, did she do what she says she's doing? Is she looking at the space? Did she bring it to CFO? How long was CFO in the space? Which, to boil it down on the sales side, is the most important piece of the Doc environment, is do I have the visibility in my deal to be proactive and to move that opportunity forward? So what I'm going to do really quickly is just show you an example workspace. I'll stop sharing for 1 second and then I'll open up Doc. So this is our demo environment. The way that I'm looking at Doc is from a leader's view. So what you'll see here is an overview of all of my open opportunities. You can see in this example, we're showing both onboarding and net new opportunities. You can slice and dice data however you like. So I want to see by individual rep. I want to see by team. I want to see how long my opportunities are, close, time to close, how many stakeholders are in each. We won't get into too much of reporting today. And all of this maps back to CRM. I'll show one simple example. So let's say that I hopped on a phone call today. My SDR set me up with an awesome opportunity, which was LinkedIn. We had a conversation. I hopped off of that call. I went into new workspace. I chose my template that I want my sales team to use. That can be set up by both leadership and or content marketing. And then from there, I choose that. I then go ahead and choose my account. And then from there, that will populate within your CRM and pull that opportunity in. I'm going to show you a fully baked workspace so you can see what this looks like. So I get off of the phone with Maryana. I say, hey, it was great chatting. I summarize our challenges. This is what our next step is going to look like. I'm going to shoot you over an email after with a portal that gives you everything we discussed today. So as you bring this forward, you don't have to do any work and you can just forward that along, as we talked about as a through line throughout our entire kind of session today. This LinkedIn space here has a couple of different modes. So I'm going to go to the shared mode first. So this is just one single link that I share with the customer. It has an overview of who you are, what's in the space, what my embedded next steps are within that space. So a lot of cool project management functionality in here, by the way. You can tag people on due dates. You can give them the ability to upload files if you have a more complex selling process, especially on the technical side. And then from there too, we can set up notifications if they need to move through the process, so that way they get all of that. And then as you can see, the space kind of reflects in a modular way whatever you want your sellers actually highlighting. So you can see a sample pitch deck embedded here. Our call recordings, gong calls actually embed right within the workspace, so they show up really beautifully. You can pull in snippets, so that way your buyer doesn't have to go anywhere, or someone that wasn't able to join a conversation. And then as you see up at the top here, as I move through the funnel, I can add in different sections, whether that be an executive summary for them to pitch effectively back to leadership, a product deep dive to signpost them to different parts of the product that's really important to them. As a caveat, pretty much any tool that you're using to sell today we play nice with. So whether that's a Vimeo, a Wistia video, a G Slide, whatever you might need. And then in closing, you'll see here in the editor mode, as the rep, as the manager, I have the ability to hide or show anything within this workspace, depending on where I'm at in that funnel, and then republish it back to the client. I'll close with this because I want to stay on time. Once this thing is shared in your email, so simple. They just click a link, they type in their email, and on the back end, every single time that your champion views this space, shares it internally, clicks to download something, you and your rep get a notification via doc, via email, via Slack alerts that we can set up for you. And then we give you a nice little view of how multi-threaded you are in the organization too as you move through the funnel. That's a lot. We also have a full library that you can place all of your assets and your reps can pull into one place. So you have control on everything they're sharing versus having some old, outdated case study that's a client that you no longer have and things like that. If you're interested in learning a little bit more, I'd be happy to personally or have one of my team members walk you through the space. And I just want to say a big thank you for everyone's time today. And with that, I will hand it back to Eduardo. Oh, and the last thing that I'll mention is you will receive a doc workspace today as a follow-up with the webinar, the overview, and then anything else that you might have questions on the product.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joey. Thank you so much, Mariana, too, for the knowledge today. Audience, thank you for coming here today and learning with the two speakers. I told you the key takeaways will be amazing. Thanks so much for joining us. Audience, you are the best part of MSP. Mariana, Joey, it was a pleasure having you here. Audience, enjoy the rest of your day. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.
Thanks so much.